acoustics, but I was making them very clanky and making records that sounded of the time, but I was also out of time, you know. Maybe Fated Nations was the time when I really did start putting my shoulders back and moving into another gear. By then I was working with all sorts of different people. Moya from Clanad, Nigel Eaton was playing hurdy-gurdy, Nigel Kennedy was playing violin with me, had string sections and with Sarod and from South India playing on records. And I was growing up.
Robert was in a hurry, you know, Robert was definitely in a hurry, but I certainly felt that Manny Nirvana had been rushed, and this time he wanted it to be organic. There was, you know, the machines and the drum machines and the synthesizer noises and the bells and all that stuff should go and be replaced with proper organic music. Well, that was sort of fine, but of course I was still pulling towards the pop song side of things.
A much more self-confident album, really, in which he's able to indulge more of his broad range of influences. You know, and this is perhaps where he begins to find his unique voice and identity.
Part of that unique identity lay in the mix of influences from both East and West that had stirred Plant's muse throughout his life. During the recording sessions for Fate of Nations, Robert had been emphatic in his desire to find a harmonious blend of West Coast rock and Eastern textures, but it proved to be a vision that did not necessarily come naturally to his musicians.
Well, he kept on saying, you know, let's get the Indian orchestra in. We did. Got the Indian orchestra in. It's got to be more like Moby Grape. So we put down the electric guitars and picked up acoustic ones, you know, and it still didn't sound like Moby Grape, you know, because it's Kevin McMichael who's playing. He tunes guitars too well. I'm sure it was a frustration to Robert. We used to write little notes to ourselves, you know, like we had Robert put up a big white board, right, so we could have a list of things we have to do in the hope that we were going to move along faster. Well, that white board became ridiculous. We were writing, you know, today, the last 2 days have been good days, to which Robert would write underneath, if you like that sort of thing.
You know, Robert can't go out on his own and do it all as some sort of one-man band. You know, he can't sit there and strum and sing and not be to some extent dependent on collaborators. So with something like Fate of Nations, you know, here is someone who's hearing in his head a sound that kind of amalgamates East and West, and yet the guys he's working with, people like Phil Johnston, you know, are not, ultimately, why should they be, you know, capable of helping Robert realize that in the way that he would ultimately like.
I mean, maybe if Robert, he had to make a major decision to get it sounding more like that. Find the guys from Moby Grape and go over to America and record some stuff with them. Go over to India, record an orchestra, sack the whole band, and do it with guys who do that sort of thing. Don't. Please, well, no, I don't mind being asked, and I will try and deliver it as much as I can. But Chris Hughes and we're puffy white soul pop boys from, you know, influenced primarily by the Beatles, you know, and the Beach Boys. So we couldn't realise it. We tried our best, and then he tried lots of other people and got them. And when Robert was satisfied, then it came out as a record.
There's a huge intent on his part to bring in all of these more diverse elements into his music, into his recordings, but it's very, very difficult without actually using musicians who understand and are familiar and work in those styles, which is why perhaps when we come to the unleaded performance with Jimmy Page, he's possibly realised this himself by this point and understands that to capture that Eastern flavour or Arabic flavour that he's looking for, he needs to start using musicians from that genre.
When Plant finally alighted on an appropriate frame for his ambitions, it was, ironically, that of Led Zeppelin. In 1994, at the invitation of MTV's Unplugged series, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant reunited to record a series of Arabic interpretations of Zeppelin songs for both the MTV show and a subsequent album entitled No Quarter, Page and Plant Unleaded.
It's tempting to see the decision to hook up with Page again as even quite cynical, certainly opportunistic, because Robert, at some level, enjoyed the massive fame and success of Zeppelin and hadn't experienced that as a solo artist. I think it was a sort of opportunistic compromise. We can do Zeppelin again, but we're not going to call it Zeppelin. The loophole here is not to invite John Paul Jones to the party, because if we do, then it's Zeppelin. This way, we can put a completely different spin on it, but we can still clean up at the box office. But we'll make it interesting. We'll completely rework the whole Zeppelin catalogue. We'll do something really radical and different with it. And you know, everyone knows we love world music. So this is the light bulb concept, you know. And we'll get this Egyptian ensemble in, and it won't be Zeppelin, capital letters. It will not be Led Zeppelin.
In a way, going back to what they'd attempted in 1972 and not quite brought off, which was introducing these elements of world music into Led Zeppelin's rock and roll sound and creating this fusion of East and West.
As in 1972, the marriage of East and West was fraught with difficulty. Initial attempts proved unsuccessful, and Page and Plant eventually turned to Egyptian percussionist and arranger Hossam Ramzi in order to realize the project.
They wanted an Arabian Middle Eastern feel, and the closest one that Robert, I believe, has been in touch with, of course, is the Moroccan side of things. Unfortunately, the kind of direction that was going in the original arrangement of the music was a full, luscious Arabian flavor of sound, which came from the fact that those who were trying to arrange the stuff, they were trying to give a really, really, really good service to Robert and Jimmy, but it was just like far too much falafel in the dish. You know, the sound of Led Zeppelin is in my mind, is a combination of extreme richness with minimalistic kind of thrusts that combines various genres of music.
Having those Egyptian musicians playing the counter rhythms, and to have that mood on stage where the English orchestra, when they're not playing, are in a frenzy, just moving along with it themselves. I mean, that means it's working beyond anything I could have wished for, really.
You could get shivers, you know. I was getting shivers listening to the Egyptians playing, and just the whole texture of what was going on. And you know, as I say, we know that we've, you know, achieved that, and yet there's so much more that we can do.
The idea was, how do I